This was oddly the most difficult review I've had to write. I'll get to why, but first let's introduce some of the ideas behind Songs for the Dusk, a vibrant and hopeful science fantasy game that uses the system behind Blades in the Dark to tell stories about community. There's a subgenre of science fantasy I love that I've been calling post-fall science fantasy. You'll probably know it when you see it. It's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, it's Numenera, it's Horizon Zero Dawn, it's Hyperlight Drifter, it's She-Ra. This book here is probably the most by-the-numbers example I've read, Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. It has all the key elements. In the distant past, a technologically advanced civilization was destroyed by an earth-shattering cataclysm, and now, generations later, societies are rebuilding in the ruins, rediscovering technology that is essentially no different from magic. And with it, they're building their communities amongst the strange and incomprehensible megastructures, and the powerful are using this inheritance to wage war, build nations, and establish new empires. Songs for the Dusk is, in the best possible sense, the Ashes of the Sun of TTRPGs, leaning into those tropes. The weird megastructures, the blend of technology and magic, the ancient cataclysm, the nation building. But beyond the aesthetic tropes, something these stories often have in common is colourfulness. Vibrant, diverse characters, bright optimism, and themes of hope and community. And that is where Songs for the Dusk really shines. And if you'll stick with me, I'd like to explain how. Now, right out of the gate, you might notice I'm looking at a digital version, which is a bit unusual for this channel. The only reason being that I tend to find physical books a bit easier to read. Apart from Blades in the Dark, which for some reason is also one of the toughest books I've ever tried to pass. Songs for the Dusk only has a digital version available and is very close in its rules and writing style to the original Blades in the Dark, so I'll admit that reading this book was really difficult for me. I had hoped to get this review out 2 or 3 weeks ago, in fact. And yet, the layout is brilliant, simple, stylish, with occasional splashes of colour, accents on rules terminology, and really cool decorations, like these glyphs to represent different crews and playbooks. You get over 300 pages of rules, advice, and setting info, like these really fun maps of the different regions. And talking of which, the download comes with various extras like these maps as separate files, and playbooks, and also a 4-page rules reference that you can print and use as a GM screen, and a quick start guide. Tamaris is our world in the far future, but so much has happened between now and then that any comparison is nearly meaningless. First, there was the Radiant era, a time of incredible, near-limitless technology, an end to food scarcity, eradicated diseases, prolonged lifespans, truly sapient AI, and even newly engineered life. But despite these technological advances, there was something still deeply wrong in the Radiant Society, and they couldn't stop the cataclysm from bringing it all down. The people of today don't know exactly what caused it, but they know it was a violent reshaping of the face of the Earth, and the survivors emerged from their bunkers to find a completely different world outside. And not just the new shape of landmasses, but the shape of biological and mechanical life. Even the shape of reality itself. They were awakening into a world with new rules that transcend the old laws of physics. The game takes place hundreds of years after this cataclysm, where various societies have risen from the ashes, some trying to establish themselves as nation-states, some expanding into empires, and others wanting none of that. It's a world full of factions within factions, secret societies with conflicting goals and deep grudges against each other. The world is broken up into regions, each with 6 or so points of interest and a similar number of factions you can build relations with. Or not, if you prefer. As players, you take on the role of striders, groups who take on difficult tasks for the prosperity of their community. Creating that crew is quite an in-depth process, and you might be familiar with some of the steps if you've played Blades in the Dark or similar games, where you're not just creating characters, but a group identity that effectively has its own character sheet. So I thought it might be useful to walk through the crew I created when I was testing, because it's one thing to list the process and another to see how it creates some really fun stories. So first, I picked the crew type Silvers, Infiltrators and Smugglers. Each crew type has a sort of subclass, a speciality, the kind of mission they tend to take. I picked Liberating Resources, which gave my community an asset, Hardlight Holograms. But before you develop the crew, you fill out this section about their community. That involves picking a region, which the book helpfully breaks down by the kinds of stories you might want to tell. And I'm quite into underclasses rebelling against the upper society at the moment, so I picked Corundum, the Red Empire. And I got particularly drawn to the Celestial Abyss, a kilometers deep chasm with diamond circuitry covering its walls. I figured maybe the Empire has a permanent settlement here, extracting resources for the war effort. Covering the walls of the chasm in a vertical city connected by gondolas, clunky elevators, and precarious bridges, I imagined secret tunnels my community uses in the dark depths of the abyss, hidden by those hard-light holograms to smuggle resources out under the nose of the Empire. And already, I had a great idea for the name of my community. If the Empire was extracting diamond from the chasm, my people would be the Rough. Next, you choose another asset for your community, and there was one that stuck out to me immediately: secret passageways. That was perfect. You then look at the factions list and decide which faction helped build this asset, and which faction it's detrimental to, and give yourself a starting standing with them. And as I looked through the factions, the starting situation really solidified in my mind. Tango Foxtrot are a group of smugglers who operate across the border between the Empire and the Meridian Valley. They've recently hired a group called the Lantern Agency to assassinate Imperial Paladin Beckon, the head of the Cardinal Frontier Division, an army that operates in the same border region. Unbeknownst to them, the Leaf Needles, a spy agency from the city-state of Junivale in that valley, are also planning to assassinate one of the 3 Imperial Paladins and frame the other, because there's a growing tension between Beckon and Imperial Paladin Tespero, the head of Imperial Security, who I imagined might be currently at the Celestial Abyss, looking into the supply chain problems caused by my community and the smugglers. And maybe also there's Harkin Stillwater, one of the Sickle Princes and CEO of the Empire's Industrial Corporation, who's unhappy with the war effects on his company. And already, as I gave myself a +1 with Tango Foxtrot and a -1 with the Sickle Princes, I got this flaming tinderbox of a political situation. But we're not done yet, because then we create some NPCs for the community and assign them to the community assets we have. So I assigned a Tango Foxtrot member to the secret tunnels and an old inventor to the hardlight holograms. And next you pick your signature gear, which decreases its load, making it more appealing to use on missions. And straight away, Jump Kit seemed the obvious and very cool choice for my smugglers, essentially the omnidirectional mobility gear from Attack on Titan. And after picking a crew starting ability and filling in the narrative details like my community's ideals, I was nearly ready to build my characters. Like I said, it's quite in-depth. The characters were actually a little quicker though. A case of picking one of 7 playbooks, deciding whether your character is genetically altered, synthetic, or a more traditional human, then assigning action dots, which will hopefully look familiar if you're used to Forged in the Dark style games. If not, I'll get to that. You choose a special ability, as well as that character's own signature gear, and give them both narrative anchors within the community, as well as a core belief which will get tested and possibly changed during gameplay. This isn't a solo game, but for my testing I made a crew of 3 characters. Skim the Kestrel, a headstrong and agile scout with scaled arms who hero worships the Tango Foxtrot contact NPC. Ash the Scrapper, a grounded tinkerer who owes everything to the old inventor character for taking him and his sister in when they were young. And Ash's sister Ember, a quiet witch who can barely control her transcendent powers but finds comfort in the quiet darkness of the deep abyss. And together they were ready to take on the Empire for their community, the Rough. Or at least get into a lot of trouble trying. The gameplay was really quite complicated to parse for me. I tend to avoid comparing games to each other unless it's helpful, and in this case, if you're used to Blades in the Dark, you'll get the basic rules no problem. I don't mean to sound so critical, just for some reason I struggled to absorb the information in exactly the same way that I struggled with Blades in the Dark when I first read it a few years ago. I've heard other people say a similar thing, and I mentioned it very briefly in my Wildsea review, how these kinds of games tend to be text-dense and have a lot of advice alongside the rules. And I think for me, I tend to prefer a clearer distinction these days, so I'll break it down to the fundamentals and try to show how Songs for the Dusk uses its rules to build on the themes of community, diversity, and solidarity. There are distinct phases of play that you cycle through, the mission and downtime, with freeform play linking them if necessary. You might decide on a mission objective or be presented one by the GM, and instead of planning, you can more or less leap right into the action by picking an approach from 6 options and a loadout, which is essentially how many points you have to spend on using inventory items later. The GM then uses the objective, approach, and loadout information to make an engagement roll, which determines if the action starts with the players in a controlled, a risky, or a desperate position. And then we play to find out what happens from there. The players decide how to proceed and will inevitably come to make an action roll. And here's where the starting position is important. If you're not used to it, this might seem a little complicated, but here's my super simple overview of action rolls. Each time you do something challenging, you decide which action rating you'll be using. These are the dots you assign to various approaches in character creation. There are 12 different approaches governed by 3 different categories. Essentially, how many dots there are in that row determines how many d6s you start with in your pool. That amount can be added to by various things like help from a teammate, pushing yourself by taking a level of stress, making a Lotus bargain and inviting some other negative consequence, or finally by using a team metacurrency called Harmony. So even if you have no dots in your action row, there are always ways to add more dice. The GM also declares the position and impact of the roll. This is the part I always found really confusing in Blades in the Dark, until I started thinking of it like this. Each roll comes with risk and reward. The risk is the position. You can usually assume this is a mid-level of risk. Risky. Unless something adjusts it up or down, like the engagement roll or some other factor. The reward is the impact, how much you'll achieve with this roll. The impact defaults to normal again, unless something adjusts it to weak or strong. You then roll your pool of d6s and look for the highest number. The GM checks a table that takes into account the risk and reward and basically reads off the result. Generally speaking, the impact will be how many segments of a clock does this action fill if you roll high. If you're not familiar with clocks, they're just trackers that either count up or down to some objective. And generally speaking, the risk might incur some consequence depending on how low you roll, like suffering harm, for example. But if you don't want that harm, you can also just say no and make a resistance roll, which this time only takes into account the number of dots in the relevant governing attributes column, and instead of looking at the degrees of risk and reward, the dice tell you how much stress you take for resisting that harm. The beauty of this Forged in the Dark style is how you end up with a lot of conditions and resources that all interconnect to propel the story forward. It's never a binary pass or fail. You've got position and impact, clocks, stress, harm, gear, all working together to produce all these interesting states of tension that can get pretty wild. And added into that, in songs you also have harmony and melody. Harmony is a metacurrency that represents how well your group works together. You generate harmony at the start of a mission, or when you roll well in a desperate position, and can spend it to add dice to your roll. Melody is a more individual resource spent to power your special abilities. And when the mission is complete, you have a whole different set of resources to consider in downtime: shells and prosperity, pressure and hazard, and maybe even XP and faction standing. First off, you determine how many shells the mission was worth, which is a roll depending on the tier of the faction or community you did the job for. Shells are a kind of currency in Tamaris, but we're being very abstract here and investing the shells you generate into your community. As you generate more shells, you can increase the prosperity of the community and then spend it to build new assets. Then you mark pressure, which is essentially how much chaos you caused on your mission. Filling a pressure track rolls over into different tiers of hazard and affects your community ideals. And finally, you use the pressure level to roll on an aftermath table, which tells you what happens next, how the world responds to your actions. These are essentially the song's equivalent of payoff and heat in Blades, and I absolutely love it. I love how pressure and shells are kind of mirror images of each other, showing in a concrete way how your actions affect the world around you. And this is the brilliance of songs. So, why was this so difficult to review for me to write? Well, let me put it this way. People recommended this game to me, and I immediately fell in love with the concept. A Forged in the Dark, Bright Science Fantasy game about community building is so my kind of thing, and I was really rooting for Songs to win the audience pick vote, which it did. And in a sense, I'd already decided I loved it before seeing the results of that poll. But I take this reviewing thing seriously and want to dig into a game, spend time with it, test it out and play it as much as I reasonably can, when generally that means playing solo. But then these two problems: that there's no print version, and that not only is it a Forged in the Dark style game, but it seems to have started life as a straight up Blades hack, inheriting all the things that makes Blades difficult for me to read. And so the more time I spent with Songs, the more stressed I got that I wasn't making enough progress. There's a point where I need to stop testing a game and start writing, otherwise the game becomes a chore rather than a joy. And I don't want to go into a review resenting a game. I want to understand what it's trying to do and present it in its best light. And I especially didn't want to resent Songs for the Dusk because this is absolutely my kind of thing, something I genuinely want to make a go-to game. Because it's not just that it's a colourful science fantasy Blades hack. but that the way it uses those ideas of interconnected resources to tell kind of mirror image stories to the gritty enterprise building of Blades and turning them into bright, optimistic community building is exactly what I want from a Forged in the Dark game. This really is Blades in the Light. And this is a difficult review to write because the friction of wanting to do a good job reviewing a game made me feel a lot more stressed than usual when looking at a game I want to spend a lot more time with than usual. This is an aspect of reviewing games that we don't tend to talk about, that when we test a game, we're not really enjoying it as the designer intended, but we're examining it more critically, looking for angles and talking points. I just want to go back to Songs. I want to play my crew of smugglers in the rough. I want to play, not test, not read and stress, but play it and enjoy it as it was intended. I just need a little break from it first. Thank you so much to the folks on Patreon and Ko-fi who voted in the audience pick poll to bring this game to my table. Honestly, after doing this a couple of times, it's really cool how this approach tends to find these obscure games that are right up my alley, ones I wasn't really familiar with but should have been. And discovering cool and obscure games that deserve more attention is what this channel is all about. So let's do this again. How it works is, anyone at all can recommend a game to review, so please do recommend some in the comments below. And then later I put together a shortlist of 10 to 15 or so and put it to paid supporters in a ranked choice poll, and the winner gets a guaranteed review. So if you'd like to vote or feel eager and able to support what I do here, please do head over to Patreon or kofi.com/cozyrpgreviews, where I'll host the next poll. Assuming everything goes to plan, I should have a little preview of a really cool looking game up next week. So until then, happy adventures.